It's time to get your quick fix with the remix. I'm Remixus, and I hope y'all are having a fantastic day. Welcome back to the channel, and I hope you're excited for some new Ember news. We have a couple new builds with a few changes, and the second part of this video is going to talk a little bit about an issue that I feel needs to be addressed. But first, what's new and what's in game? First of all, we can now exit our Omni frames. We have a playable male and female avatar that's usable, though difficult to control. It's slow to move and doesn't play how you would expect to move, but I'm sure this movement will be leveled out in the future. Right now, it's currently using the animations for the Omni frame, so it feels kinda awkward. After we run around a bit, we're able to get back into our Omni frames. The female looks like the basis for the cat girl that we saw last year, but overall, its model is pretty decent so far. Keep in mind, this is still very alpha, so expect to see things like cosmetics, skins, and other customization options in the future. Here's the male version, and the female version. We saw an update that also improved performance with AMD graphics cards by utilizing FSR rendering. How it works is a bit over my head, but to make things easy, it basically takes an image and makes it easier to display by cutting down on difficult to notice textures. You'll technically have a slightly worse image, but you shouldn't be able to notice the textures. Personally, I wasn't able to, and I ended up seeing an increase of about 20 FPS, but more testing is needed. The other update we saw was Crotus's leg. This is going to be what you're mostly seeing up close when you're fighting him, so they did a lot of texturing to detail this area. We also had a couple cool updates concerning members of the staff. So Ronan, who has been huge with the community and is the one that's usually yelling deep strike at the end of their dev streams, is now the director of marketing. Meanwhile, Faye, the person who will usually greet you once you enter the Discord, has been upgraded to community manager, so congratulations to the both of you. In the most recent dev stream, we also had some interesting interactions dealing with AI, and how you can use AI to generate images. This can be pretty interesting if you're using them as concept art, especially if you want to take it to an actual artist after you have gotten kind of an idea of what you're looking for. You can see a few photos of different ideas that were used during the stream, but essentially this allows you to take concept art and give it to an artist who will actually take it the last mile before you go ahead and render it into your game. This allows anybody to be an artist so long as you have an idea. But there's still no substitute for the real deal, so you still need an artist to actually create it and take it the final steps. The last thing we saw was a high quality concept drawing of the first mount. This will be added sometime in the future. Also, a bit off topic, but I wanted to comment on the whole 30 minutes to getting into the game. 10 to 20 minutes to get a feeling of what Ember is and how it plays is perfectly fine. When you consider character creation, movement, understanding the layout, what the UI looks like, that's going to take several minutes. You don't want the same thing as in PlanetSide, where I was simply dropped into a fight and had no idea what controls to press in order to move or to fight. Luckily, it was still rather familiar to me because I play Battlefield games. Now, on to the more controversial topic, claim stakes. Now, I don't want to cause drama, even though one of the nights I was pretty heated myself. But I think it's important to talk about these for a few reasons. The first is, it's a major change. The second is the potential pitfalls that I want to highlight for the devs. And the third is the confusion about what's going on with what's being worked on. Keep in mind, I don't fully understand how this will work, but I'll do the best to explain it in a way that at least makes sense to me and why it's generated contention. So in a dev build, we were shown the ability to transport to a new area and to start building. This idea will be a place that you can lay claim to by clearing the area from hostile activity. It could be clearing a storm, fighting off monsters, or simply finding an unoccupied area. This area will have some resources you need for basic crafting, but will not contain all the resources you need, and in order to get those, you'll have to travel back to the normal world of Ember. So in your claim stake, you'll set up a small shelter, set up a few crafting stations, and you'll be able to, at a minimum, upgrade gear. but you may be able to build grandiose homes. You would also have a few prefab buildings that you could simply drop or might be able to buy from blueprints from other players to drop a specific layout that you want to set up. So that's kind of the basics of what's going on. So far, most people were fine with this idea, though it was laid out pretty poorly in a chief chat. Most people recognize MMOs have some sort of player housing, so we all understand this. Keep in mind, this concept is still very early in development, so what I say may very well change, but here is the controversial problems. Grum said that the items we build in the claim stakes would be destructible. He also said the map of Ember would be 1/10 the size of Earth. He also said that people would see your claim stakes, though started to kind of pull away from that idea, saying that the claim stakes would be pretty far apart. Also, guilds might be able to form up and lay claim to several stakes in the area. So while I understand this is a very young concept, it generates way too many questions to not be thought out. I tried to bring up the question of a persistent world where people with jobs can't no-life the game. Would their buildings be destroyed when they get back from work or from vacation? Other people asked about the problem of making a huge world with no content. People began asking, what if someone is making a house in the form of something offensive to me, like a phallic object, and I don't want to see that? It was also said that you would start without an omniframe, but that was later backtracked once more thought was put in. Finally, the question of why not making instances instead of putting them on the specific world was brought up. At this point, the boss felt like the community was simply shitting on his idea and saying that if we don't want to interact with players, then we shouldn't play multiplayer games. This angered several people, including myself, because it simply brushed off the question instead of thinking about the actual problems. Now, since then he has apologized, which, Grums, thank you for that. But I still want to get into some of those questions. And for the record, no, the community did not start singing a different tune and start praising them all of a sudden. I don't know where that idea came from because I was watching both Twitch and Discord at the same time that was said.
Wait, no, claim stakes, that's selling power. That's like a vital part of the game. I need that, and every player should have it for free. And then it's the total opposite argument of last week.
Now, I have to agree with Maven when he talks about this feature, and how it feels a lot more like we're adding a single player game into an MMO, and changing what the core is. The core should always be Firefall, but when you have the game that relies on a single player element, now you've gone and taken the multiplayer aspect and made it half multiplayer and half solo player. That's not necessarily a bad thing when we talk about player housing, but if it talks about core features, that kind of becomes a problem. Also, Mr. Kern, you've been accused in the past of changing the design features at a whim and completely offsetting the development of Firefall. I still get comments about it in my videos. I don't know how true they are, but it does kind of make me wonder, especially as we just came out with a roadmap to tell us what's supposed to be in the Kickstarter. And I want to reiterate, this is not necessarily a bad idea. It just needs to be well thought out and carefully implemented. Now, some of these are being talked about on the forums and on various videos, but I want to demonstrate a few core issues that I have with some other games and show how they would translate over to this game. My first is offline destructibility. This might be able to be solved by having populations fight to defend your claim stake. However, this creates a new problem of having too much area to fight and not enough Reapers to defend the territory. This essentially means people who have real-life commitments are punished for not taking care of things in real life. You might be able to solve this by putting enough resources in to prevent decay over time, but it does nothing if you have to leave on vacation or an emergency for a few weeks. What about your computer dying and you don't have the money for several months to replace it? For instance, if I take a break from Black Desert, my home is exactly the same as the way I left it. Nothing stolen, nothing destroyed. However, you do want to make sure that abandoned claim stakes are available for people who will actually use them, especially if you have a limited amount of space. The next question, I'm going to use Black Desert and PlanetSide. We have two massive worlds. Both are MMOs, and both have a problem of a ton of open space with little to nothing to do in them. BDO, or Black Desert Online, combats this by having a ton of materials that are craftable, and you can obtain rare resources while harvesting the items you would go for normally. You might be chopping trees and get several drops on rare loot. They've also created servers for areas that were low-level grinding zones to make them very strong and drop good money and loot. It's not perfect, and they still have a lot of dead space, but it's at least not completely pointless to go back to these areas. PlanetSide, meanwhile, has a lot of empty terrain that, unless the combat moves that far back, it's pointless to even have. Here's the map, and you can see the action is the yellow dots lighting up while the areas outside the yellow dots have little to no activity in them. Another problem was people bunching up into small communities, leaving areas barren. Well, we see this in Black Desert. Now, to be fair, this is somewhat self-induced on their part, because some areas are far more beneficial than others simply because they're stacked with what they offer. For instance, Velia and Heidel have nearly every shopkeeper in the game, plus they have good spots to fish, farm, and gather. Plus, because they were at the beginning of the game, their housing is cheap. This means that other good places to live are not visited as much because they're just too far away or don't offer enough incentive for you to leave the area that you're in. In a procedurally generated world, you are bound to find a few sweet spots and plenty of desert like we see in the real world. If you're making a world 1/10 the size, you are bound to have large areas with nothing, and some areas that have everything. Looking at you, Arizona. This brings us to the next question of people bothering you. Now, it's been mentioned over and over that PvP is disabled. It's not a core feature of the game. But does this mean that the buildings you craft cannot be destroyed by players? Is it possible for a player to lure NPCs to your base to destroy it? A report system might work for most items, but good luck reporting on that. What about if in your claim stake you make a work of art that is generally loved by the community? Then another group decides to build a giant but non-offensive wall around your building that looks incredibly ugly. Perhaps you have, say, a cathedral, and someone makes a mural of someone vomiting behind it. This is not technically illegal, but it's totally trolling. The reason I ask is because griefing is a thing, and some people go to extreme lengths to target people, while not breaking any actual rules. I ask not because this is some sort of fictitious or obtuse idea, but legitimately something that happens in the real world. Graffiti on landmarks is a thing. Many people will destroy art and cultural items simply because they don't like them. A perfect example of this was a certain group from Syria who destroyed monuments in Palmyra, which stood for several hundreds of years. So yes, you can ban people, but that might not be feasible if they're not actually breaking a rule, just simply acting like an asshat. Alright, that about wraps up the news and my questions. I don't expect to have all the answers for these issues, but I do think they need to be carefully considered when implementing claim stakes. Again, I'm not against them, but they have to be very carefully and thoughtfully crafted. If I'm wrong or misspoken, let me know down in the comments. And if you like what I'm doing, leave me a like and keep subscribed for more Ember content. As always, keep it real and keep it on Remix.